Hi, greetings, it's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is video number 6 of our Human Resource Management video series. And today in this video number 6, we're going to be talking about selecting employees and placing them in jobs. It's probably one of the most important things that human resource people do, and what you need to know is that who you hire can make or break a company in some way. So you have to really understand what the best human resource professionals know about selecting the right employee and putting them in proper jobs. So we're going to be talking about some things that even if you don't work for the government, we're going to be talking about some requirements that the government has for selecting employees, because they really would be good best practices for you to consider no matter the size of your organization. You need to be able to talk about different methods of selecting employees, and we're going to be talking a little bit about employment tests, how to conduct effective interviews, and how employers can make the best selection possible. So let's talk about what personnel selection is. So it's the process in which organizations make decisions about who or who will not be allowed to join the organization. And it's really about really identifying someone from the recruitment process. Let's face it, sometimes there are hundreds of applicants and maybe there's only one position. And so it's about really being able to reduce the number of best qualified applicants who can perform the job. So there are so many different types of organizations out there, and so you really have to be thinking about the specific position. For instance, if you're an organization and you're looking for someone to deal directly with your organization's customers, you should really have some kind of measurement process for helping you select somebody who is more customer oriented. It seems like a no-brainer, but whatever the position is, you should have some kind of tool to be able to measure at least employee interest, because in things that we have a preference in, that we generally do better at as a whole. So here are some essential steps in the selection process. So selecting applications and resumes, testing and reviewing work samples, interviewing the candidates, checking references and backgrounds, and then making the selection. So essentially that's the basic selection process. So many organizations these days allow applicants to post their resumes online or fill out an application online. And I can remember a time when nobody did that, and it became kind of a rare thing, but now very few people actually use paper. And so that's kind of a transition that I've seen take place over the years. And so there are becoming more automated processes now that have a tracking system and even evaluate keywords within applications. In a selection process, the job descriptions are considered there, and it really is about identifying the person that has the right knowledge, abilities, skills, and other, KSASOs, as we talk about them here in the human resource world. The strategy selection really requires you to be able to measure effectiveness in using the right tools to do so. In the selection process, we need to take a look at reliability, validity, and things that can be generalized, that can apply towards the candidates, and offers high utility and uses legal selection in the criteria. So we're going to talk about each of these things being reliable, valid, generalized, high utility, and legal, of course. So reliability is the extent to which measurement is free from random error, and reliability measures consistent results. We need to use statistical tests that can be compared over time, and we use statistical correlation coefficients, and a higher correlation coefficient signifies a greater degree of validity. So let's talk about validity. The validity is the extent to which performance on a measurement, such as a test score, is related to what the measure is designed to assess, such as job performance. And the federal government's uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures accept three ways of measuring validity. Criterion, that's related, content, and then construct. So criterion-related validity is a measure of validity based on showing substantial correlation between test scores and job performance. And there are two kinds of research possible for arriving at criterion-related validity, and that's predictive validation and concurrent validation. So predictive validation is research that uses test scores of all applicants and looks for a relationship between scores and future performance of applicants who were hired. Concurrent validation is research that consists of administering a test to people who currently hold a job and then comparing their scores to existing measures of a job performance. And so you could use measures of a student's aptitude, and that would be comparing intelligent test scores with college GPA, for instance. And so that will allow you to take a look at their performance as a whole. In the selection process, you have to consider content validity, and this is about consistency between tests, items, or problems and kinds of situations or problems that could occur on the job. Construct validity consists between a high score on a test and a high level of a construct, like an intelligence or leadership ability, as well as between mastery of this construct and successful performance on a job. So you need to have the ability to generalize. And a generalizable selection method applies not only to the conditions in which the method was originally developed, the job, organization, people, time period, etc. It also applies to other organizations, jobs, applicants, and so on. So practical value really is what you need to consider. It being valid, reliable, and generalizable adds value to a selection method. Another consideration is the cost of using the selection method. Selection methods should cost significantly less than the benefits of hiring a new employee, and methods that provide economic value greater than the cost of using them are said to have utility. So let's talk about legal standards for selection. Let's face it, you don't want to make a hire or not make a hire and then get sued. So all selection methods really must conform to existing laws and legal precedent. And 3 acts have been formed for the basis of a majority of lawsuits filed by job applicants. And so let's talk about those really quickly. And I know I talked about these in an earlier video. Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1991, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, and then the American Disabilities Act of 1991. So you really have to be very, very clear about what these laws suggest and make sure that you are not discriminating against potential candidates or candidates, potential job holders. So there are some things once you get into the interview that are permissible and not permissible. And so I'm going to share with you a list of things that you can say or ask and you shouldn't ask because it's illegal. So, what is your full name? Have you ever worked under a different name? You can ask that of all candidates. What you can't do is say, what is your maiden name or what's the nationality of your name? Illegal. Permissible. If you're hired, can you show proof of age to meet if there's a legal age requirement? You can't say, how old are you? How would you feel about working with someone younger than you? Illegal. What you can say is, will you need any reasonable accommodation for this hiring process? Are you able to perform this job with or without reasonable accommodation? What you can't say is, what is your height, your weight? Do you have any disabilities? Have you been seriously ill? Please provide a photograph of yourself. What you can ask, are you fluent in a language that's specifically needed for that job? And a statement that employment is subject to verification of an applicant's identity and employment eligibility under immigration laws. You cannot ask, what is your ancestry? Are you a citizen of the United States? Where were you born? How did you learn to speak that language? So those are illegal questions. What you can ask, what schools have you attended? What degrees have you earned? What was your major? What you cannot ask, is that school affiliated with a religious group? When did you attend high school? To learn the applicant's age. What you can ask, can you meet the requirements of the work schedule? You can ask all candidates that. What you cannot ask is, what is your religion? What religious holidays do you observe? What you can ask, can you meet the job requirements to travel overnight several times a month? What you can't ask is, what is your marital status? Would you like to be addressed as Mrs. or Ms.? Do you have any children? What you can ask, have you ever been convicted of a crime? What you can't ask is, have you ever been arrested? What you can ask is, what organizations or groups do you belong to that you consider relevant to being able to perform this job? What you can't ask is, what organizations or groups do you belong to? So, these are just a few examples of things that you can ask and you can't ask. So, candidates have privacy rights that potential employers really must adhere to. When you're gathering data in the selection process, you really have to consider all of that information confidential. And very often, people will have a concern when they're filling out information online. So you really have to make sure when you're collecting data that you're using secure websites. Your company is responsible for the information that is collected, and you have to make sure that you're doing everything to make sure that you are protecting candidates' privacy rights. The Fair Credit Reporting Act requires employers to obtain a candidate's consent before using a third party to check the candidate's credit history or references. If the employer decides not to hire based on a report, the employer must give the applicant a copy of the report and a summary of the applicant's rights before taking any action. As far as the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, this is a federal law requiring employers to verify and maintain records on applicants' legal rights to work in the U.S. Applicants have to fill out a Form I-9 and present documents showing their identity and ability to work. The law prohibits employers from discriminating against against the person on a basis or national origin of citizenship. And employers can use the E-Verify system, and you can do that online at everify.com to submit information on an applicant's I-9. So some application forms allow you as an organization to have a low-cost way of gathering basic data from applicants. And it also ensures that the organization has a certain standard to categorize information, like contact information, work experience, educational background, and of course the applicant's signature. On the other hand, your organization may require applicants to submit resumes. And what you have to consider is that resumes are truly controlled by the applicant. And the good news for organizations is it's an expensive starting point, and it should be evaluated in terms of the elements of the job description. So you're comparing the information on the resume with what the actual job description is. So, and that's a good tip if you're applying for a job, by the way. Don't just have a general resume. If you're applying for a specific job, answer the questions that kind of appear on a job description. How do I fill this niche? So, references, they can be phone calls or written. References will usually be biased, and if an employee chooses someone to put on a reference, they're probably going to say nice things about them. That's one of the things about references. And most organizations check references when a candidate is a finalist for a job. Smart organizations are doing background checks, and the EEOC has guidelines for doing criminal background checks, and credit checks often need to be drawn and scrutinized. In some states, you have to understand that there's a law against using credit checks, so you have to be aware of what your state requires. Aptitude tests assess how well a person can learn or acquire skills and abilities. Achievement tests are often used, and they measure a person's existing knowledge and skills. So there's a bunch of different types of tests that some organizations use. Sometimes it's physical ability tests, sometimes it's cognitive ability tests, or job performance tests, or sometimes they're just looking at work samples or personality inventories, honesty tests, drug tests, medical examinations. These are some of the various tests that maybe you have gone through, but maybe your organization can use to, if it relates to the job itself, and showing that this may be a good candidate. The Big Five is also another personality inventory that's often considered. People high in extroversion. These people are sociable, gregarious, assertive, talkative, and expressive. Another skill measured is adjustment, their emotional state, non-depressed, secure, and content. Agreeableness, courteous, trusting, good-natured, tolerant, cooperative, forgiving. Conscientiousness probably is the most important part. Are people dependable, organized, persevering, thorough, achievement-oriented? And then inquisitiveness is a great quality that's measured in the Big Five. Are they curious, imaginative, artistically sensitive, and broad-minded and playful? So, other types of tests we talked about or mentioned was a drug test. When you're administering a drug test, it must be done systematically to all applicants for the same job. People use drug testing for jobs that involve safety hazards. Most professional jobs don't do this, but it really depends on the type of organization. And you have to have a report of the results sent to the applicant along with information about how to appeal results and be retested if that's appropriate. And you always have to respect the applicant's privacy by conducting tests in an environment that is not intrusive and keeping the results of the tests confidential. So interviews, there's many different interviewing techniques. Non-directive interviews, structured interviews, situational interviews, and behavioral description interviews. Panel interviews This is when several members of an organization meet to interview each candidate, and it really helps reduce biases. You get to see things through other people's eyes and compare and contrast the insights from the people on the panel. Computerized interviews, a little less personal, but candidates are entering responses to questions in a computer, and then it's really helpful in gathering objective data. So, when interviewing candidates, it's valid to ask about willingness to travel. That's part of the job. Interviews might ask questions about previous business travel experiences and how interviews handled situations requiring flexibility and self-motivation. These are qualities that would be an asset in someone who is traveling alone and solving business problems on the road. So there are some advantages and disadvantages in interviewing. So talking face to face, that can provide evidence of candidates' skills, personalities, and interpersonal styles, and it can provide a means to check the accuracy of the information on the applicant's resume or job application. Some of the disadvantages of interviews is that sometimes they could be reliable. You know, maybe you just have someone that's really good at interviewing and maybe even really good at lying, and it could have low validity, and it could be biased against a number of different groups. And let's face it, when you're pulling people from doing normal jobs within the organization and they're doing an interview, that can be expensive. They can't do two things at the same time. And of course, when you're using people, we're all subjective. I mean, in our nature of how we see things and our opinions about just about anything that we hear or see. So let's talk about preparing for an interview. If you understand how important the interview is in the hiring process, you really must be prepared. You are the face of the organization that you're working with. So do your best to be a good person. Put the applicant at ease. I mean, if you're going to be a colleague of this employee, you want to be kind and courteous and represent your organization well. You can ask about past behaviors. You really must listen and let the candidate do most of the talking. Take notes. You're not going to remember everything, and write notes down during and immediately after the interview. Capture your thoughts when you're hearing certain things that you think are important as it relates to the job. Write them down. You can talk about those later at another time with a human resource professional or your colleagues in making the best decision. And at the end of the interview, make sure the candidate knows what to expect and what's the next steps. So there are a couple of models that you may be experiencing in your organization, like the multiple hurdle model. And this is the process of arriving at a selection decision by eliminating some of the candidates at each stage of the selection process. And then there's the compensatory model, and this is a process of arriving at a selection decision in which a very high score on one type of assessment can make up for a low score on another. When a candidate has been selected, the organization should communicate the offer to the candidate. And the offer should include job responsibilities, work schedules, rate of pay, starting date, and then other relevant details. So I've given you a lot of information on the selection process and placing people in jobs. I highly recommend that you review this video again if you're thinking about doing hiring and selecting, or if you want to know some of the basic fundamentals about selecting the right application. Remember, a great employee can make or break a team or an organization, so you've got to hire smart and hire right. I hope you've taken something away from this video of value, and more importantly, I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.